Hey everyone, Dorian from Noesis here. Welcome and thank you for joining. We've got something super exciting in store today, and what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be spending some time together building a screen completely from scratch within Noesis Studio. Now this will be not only a great opportunity for us to cover many of the fundamentals of the application itself, but it's also going to be a great time for us to go over many of the basics of creating interfaces for Noesis. In particular, we'll cover basic layouting and how to use the grid element. We'll go over how to create our very first button templates and its associated interaction states. We'll learn how to work with data at a very basic level, as well as how to work with images and how to import vectors into your scene. We'll also be covering the animation timeline and a lot of other really cool stuff. So let's go ahead and jump in. So with our project open in Noesis Studio, the very first thing that we're going to want to do is to create a page which is going to contain the menu that we're going to make. So to do that, we'll head up to the upper left-hand corner and go to File and create New Page. You can also create a new page by pressing Ctrl-N on the keyboard, but we'll go ahead and click it. We'll go ahead and immediately rename this page 0 to what we're actually going to make this screen, which is going to be a main menu. Now you see that when you create a page, you have a page in the navigator, and if you expand that, you'll find it pre-populated with a grid element. We're going to be focusing exclusively on kind of setting up the base structure of the interface for now. So we're going to be stashing a foreground layer, an interface layer, and a background layer within this master grid. Now to add further grids, and we'll talk more about grids later, but you can go to the Add Elements tab in the upper left-hand corner, also accessible by Ctrl-2, and we'll navigate to the Panels and Layout subsection. And here we're going to find the grid element. Now there are a couple ways that you can add elements to your scene. One of them is by clicking and dragging onto the canvas itself, which you'll see it has added it under the master. But another method that you can do is you can click and drag into the layer navigator itself. So we know that we need 3 grids here. Our bottommost one is going to be the background layer. Our middle one is going to be the interface layer. And our last layer is going to be the foreground layer. Amazing. So we have our base structure in place. Next, what we're going to learn how to do is how to fill the background and the foreground element with an image texture. So let's go ahead and start with the background. Let's go ahead and click on that in the layer navigator. And what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the properties panel for it on the right side of the screen. In particular, under the appearance category, there will be a property for background. Let's go ahead and click on that. Now you'll see that you have a variety of options for how you can fill this element, anything from a solid color to a linear gradient or a radial gradient or even using a visual brush. However, what we're interested in today in this case is to use the image brush. We're going to go ahead and head down to the image source dropdown, which will provide you with a collection of images that you can apply to this, and we're going to select our background scene that we have prepared. We're going to also change the stretch method to uniform to fill, and I'll show you why. If you head up to the aspect ratio drop-down menu and you change this to free aspect, you'll see that when this becomes a square, it stretches disproportionately. However, if we were to change this to either uniform, in which it'll fill left to right, or uniform to fill, in which it'll fill the entire screen, but proportionally, we get a much better visual result. So we're going to keep uniform to fill, and we're going to go back to our 16:9 1080p aspect ratio. We're going to go ahead and do the exact same operation for our foreground, so heading over to the properties, appearance, background, and heading to image brush. We're going to select our foreground overlay from this menu, and we will set it to uniform to fill. Let's now look at how we can use solid color brushes. So we're going to go ahead and create a couple layers in our interface. One will be for a header bar and one will be for a footer bar. So let's go ahead and name this header bar, and let's go ahead and name this one footer bar. We're going to go ahead and apply a nice little blue on this. So we're going to head over to the background. We're going to head over to solid color brush, and we are going to insert our desired hex value. Now the thing that's really important to precise in this case is that the 2 first values in this format represent the opacity value or transparency or alpha value or however you want to call it. So very important to consider when you are pasting values in here. In this case, FF corresponds to 100% opacity or 0 transparency. So we'll go ahead and paste that in, and we are going to change the size of this manually, and we will make this 16 pixels tall, and let's go ahead and throw this to the very top of the screen. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of opacity to this just to improve the presentation a little bit. And we will do the exact same thing with our footer bar, which on the other hand, we will make 32 pixels tall, and we will apply the very same blue at 20% opacity, and we will throw this down to the bottom of the screen. Amazing. So now that we've learned how to work with solid colors and how to populate elements with images, let's go ahead and move on to how we can import vector assets into our scene. So the very first thing that we're going to want to do before we actually bring a vector asset in is we need a method to ensure that it always stays in the right proportions to the original art. So the best way to do that is to bring in what's called a viewbox element, and we'll go ahead and add this to our interface. And to bring a vector asset in, we need to create a grid within this. Let's go ahead and drag that into the viewbox, and we'll just call this logo viewbox because that's what we'll be bringing in. And if we click on the grid element in the panel navigator, go to Edit, Import SVG. Let's go ahead and find our logo, and you'll see that it is far too big for what we want. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we want to make sure that our parent controller, the viewbox, is set to the desired size. In our case, let's go ahead and make this 64 by 64. Now you can see that the icon itself is not aligned to where it needs to be, and that is because if we go to the grid, we will find that there is a height and width override. So to fix that, all that we have to do is to find the width and height, hit the three-dot menu on the right of the value, and clear the local values, and then we will see that it has scaled properly. And now we have full freedom to change the size of this view box, and the icon will always scale nice and proportionally with it. Let's go ahead and revert that to 64 by 64. And the next step that we're going to be looking at is we're actually going to be setting up our interface grid structure and start placing elements on our canvas. Now the grid element is arguably one of my favorite elements within this framework. It's not only a great choice for grouping elements together as you would in a layer group in your design software, but where its powers really come through is the functionality that it contains in terms of setting up rows and columns. Now, these are not purely guides, they're actually completely usable elements where you can, for example, pick to have an element span from column 1 to column 3, for example, or going from column 4 to column 5 and spanning 3 or 4 rows up. So it's a really, really powerful element, and we're going to get into how we can use this. The very first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to go to our interface layer, and what you'll see is that at the top and the bottom of this grid element, if you hover over the edges, you will get a little highlight. And this is going to be the quickest method for you to create rows and columns within this grid. So we know from the base that we want to create a screen that has a 64 pixel margin all around. We want there to be 3 horizontal columns and a couple vertical rows. So let's go ahead and create some columns first of all. We go ahead and hover over that top edge, and you'll see that the cursor changes to an arrow with a plus. And we can go ahead and click that, and a column is added. Now we have the choice to adjust this by clicking and dragging the column itself, or we can come in and we can set values ourselves. Now we have 3 different choices for column or row values: star, the pixel, and auto. We'll get into explaining how each of these work in a little bit. For now, let's go ahead and do what we want, which is a 64 pixel left margin. We'll also go ahead and make a 64 pixel right margin. Let's go ahead and talk about the star system now, which is the second option. Now what stars are is they are essentially a proportional measurement system. So what this means is that they kind of serve as you would picture, x in an equation. If you do 2 columns of 1 star each, you will see that you have 2 equally sized columns. Let's go ahead and create a third one, and we'll make these 1 star each. But in this case, we actually want to make our middle column double the width. So let's go ahead and make that 2 star, and you'll find that now you have a central column, which is double the width of your 1 star columns on the left and right of it. Let's go ahead and move to the rows next. So very similar situation. We know that we are going to want to create a 64 pixel top margin, a 64 pixel bottom margin, and then we're going to want 2 rows in the middle, and we'll go ahead and just for now make these 1 star each. And there you can see that we have a layout that we can use. Now let's go ahead and learn about how we can actually align children elements to this grid. We'll go ahead and start by using our logo that we made earlier. So we'll go ahead and first of all clear all of these values, and you'll see that in the properties panel we have a row span, a column, and a column span property. Now what's really important to know about how this works and how the row and span numbers are created is that the index doesn't start at 1, it starts at 0. So what that means in practice is that this top left corner here, basically the intersection of our upper margin and our left margin, is not column 1. This is actually column 0. And so what that means is that if we go ahead and move this icon to row 0 and column 0, it'll go in that upper left-hand corner. What this also means is if we want to put it into this lower right-hand corner, we can go ahead and basically move it to, I believe it'll be column 3 and row 2. Let's go ahead and just align that to the side, and then we have our placement for the icon. Let's go ahead and now look at adding an element that will use the auto measurement option. So to do this, we're going to create a grid, and this will be called the screen title, and we're going to place a text block into this. And this, as you can imagine, is going to be a header element that is essentially telling the user what screen they're on. So if we go into the text block itself, you'll see that there's a text field. Let's just go ahead and change that to main menu. We'll also go to the text format properties section. We're going to go ahead and just decorate this a little bit. Let's give it a little bit of a fancier font. Let's increase the text size a little bit, and let's also give it a nice blue color under the appearance section in the foreground. Foreground is what controls the text color on a text block element. Now, what we want is we want this piece of text to not be in our margins. We want it to be just inside, and we're going to want it to span 2 columns across and 1 column down. So let's go ahead to our screen title, and we can go ahead and adjust these elements. So we know that we want to be in row 1 and column 1. However, we do not want it spanning the entire width of the screen. We want to go, let's say, 2/3 of the way. So in this case, what we can do is we can go to the column span and make that span 2 columns, and you'll see that this has adjusted. Another way that you can adjust the span is by clicking and dragging on the adorners itself, and you will see that you can get some good snapping there as well. We don't want it to go the entire height of the screen, so we'll go ahead and change the row span to just be 1. Now, we need to clear these local values so that it doesn't scale them properly, and we'll go ahead and have this fill all across and fill up and down. Now, obviously, we have one problem here, which is that we do not want this row to be this tall. What we want to do is we want this row to actually constrain to the size of the text, because what we're going to do is that in the quadrant right below it, we're going to put a main menu which we want to be centered between the bottom of this text and the top of our bottom margin. So this is where the auto sizing is going to come in for grids. Let's go to our interface panel, and if we change this 1-star layout to auto, what you'll see is that this row will collapse to fit the size of the content within it. That's how the auto sizing works. Let's go ahead and press auto, and you'll see that that has collapsed. So where this becomes really, really useful is that if we go ahead and start adding what our main menu is going to be, we're going to use a stack panel for that. So I'll go ahead and drag that into the interface, and I'll call that menu stack. And we're going to go ahead and drag a couple buttons into this as well. So let's go ahead and drag a button. And we can see that, so the way that a stack panel works is it'll basically cascade elements within the group side by side, either going up and down or side to side. In our case, it's vertical, so what you can do is that you can just do Control-D to duplicate those buttons, and you'll see that they basically stack one on top of each other. It's really, really cool, and it means that you don't have to manually place some of your elements. So let's go ahead and move this to the correct row and column. First of all, we know that it needs to be in row 2 because we want it below that main menu. We only want to span 1 row, which will basically be from the top of the bottom margin to the bottom of that title text. We want to span only one column, but we want that column to be inside of our margin. We also want this to always be centered within this quadrant. Now, let's go ahead and look at some of the advantages of using an auto layout for this main menu text. Basically, what will happen is that if we have a scenario where, for example, the user changes their interface text size, it will adjust automatically because it will always scale to the size of the text. So we're going to go, something ridiculously small, but if we change that to 8, for example, you will see that the centering of this menu has changed to match what size is available, and it'll always be centered between the bottom of the text and the bottom of our save zone bounds. Let's go ahead and put that back to what it was before. And that is some of the basics of the grid element and some of the customization that you can do in terms of rows and columns. And it's really, really powerful, especially for reactive design, especially if you're targeting different devices. It's a great way to ensure that for example, that you want an element to always take up 1/3 of the screen size. You can have that assurance by using the star system. So next we're going to get into real bread and butter of interface design, which is customizing and making our very own button template. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start with one of these default buttons. And what we're going to do is if we right click on any of them, either on the canvas itself or within the layer navigator, when we go to template, we can do create template. Before we do that, however, we're just going to set a fixed height and width onto this element as a placeholder so that once it is created, it doesn't collapse on itself. And we'll go ahead to template and create. It's empty for now. We're going to fill it with goodies, but what I wanted to show you first was where this resource lives. So we basically just created a new template, and it now exists under the resources tab, which you can access via Control-6. And if you go to the page, you will see that there is a button control template 1. Let's go ahead and rename this so that we can keep track of it. So it'll be the main menu button template. Let's get into customization of this now. So just like when we created a page, when the button template was created, it came with a grid. So we'll call that main menu button master. Let's go ahead and think about how we're going to customize this now. In particular, we know that we're going to want to have some decorative elements on it. And so we're going to have a bit of an anchor on the left, and then we'll have a text and a subtitle section on the right. So let's go ahead and drag in a stack panel. And this is going to be a horizontal stack panel to basically support an element on the left and an element on the right stacked next to it. So we'll call this main menu button horizontal stack. We're also going to create a vertical stack within this, which will be for the title and subtitle of the button. So we'll call this main menu button vertical stack. And let's go ahead and start designing our decorative elements. So we're going to be using grids for this. And let's go ahead and place that right there in the horizontal stack. And we'll call this main menu button decorative. And it's going to be composed of 3 pieces. The first is going to be a backer. So main menu button decorative backer. We're going to have a spine. So that'll be main menu button decorative spine. And we're also going to have a vertical bar in the middle of it, and we will call this main menu button decorative line. So what we're going to do is we're going to first use another grid element within this. So we're going to go ahead and first of all set this to 64 pixels wide. And we are going to create a grid within this of 2 columns. Our first left-hand one is going to be 16 pixels, and this is where the spine is going to live. And our main area is going to be a 1-star area where our backer will live and where our decorative line will live. So let's go ahead and we can start filling in some color so we can actually visualize this a little bit more. We're going to want this to first of all span across the entire row that it's assigned to, which will be column 1 with a span of 1, and we're only going to have a 1-row layout here, so that's fine as is. Let's go ahead and fill that where it's supposed to be, and let's go ahead and make that 10% opacity. Let's go ahead and work on the decorative spine. So this is going to be the opposite. This is going to be in column 1 with a span of 1. So basically it'll span the 16 pixels that we specified there. We'll go ahead and color it so it becomes visible. Beautiful. And the decorative line is going to be contained on top of this backer element. So very similarly to the backer, we're going to want it in column 1 with a span of 1, but this time we're not going to have it fill. We're going to set our own height and width. Let's do a width of, let's say 8, and we'll do a height of, let's say 24, and we'll see how that looks once we apply a color to that. And that's looking pretty spot on. That's looking great. So this element will appear and disappear as we hover over it later. Next, let's move on to the vertical stack aspect, and this is going to be where a lot of our text is. So the very first thing that we're going to want to do is that we're going to want to create a separation between our subtitle and our title. So we're going to have the top will be the main menu button title area, and our second one will be our main menu button subtitle area. Now within each of these, we're going to want a backer for the content, and this will be called main menu button title area backer. And we'll create the exact same thing for the subtitle as well, where we will call this the main menu button subtitle area backer. Let's go ahead and bring in some text for this as well. So we're going to have a grid which is going to contain two different versions of the text. One will be for when it's unhovered and one will be for when it's hovered. So we'll call that main menu button title variants. And we'll go ahead and drag some text blocks in for that. So number 1 and number 2. And so this will be our main menu button title text for normal. And this will be our main menu button title text hover. Let's go ahead and start styling this text first of all. So we're going to make it a nice decorative font for both cases. And we're also going to make it nice and big, let's say 56 for each. Now, there are some layout issues at the moment, but these are because we have a fixed height and width at the button level. So we can go ahead and now that we have text in here, we can actually get rid of this, clear the local values, and it'll now fill to the entire width of the area that we have allocated to it. To edit a button, once you've come out of it, you can just go edit, under template, edit current, and you can jump right back in and access your content here. Now this is not spanning the entire way across, so it means that there is a value set somewhere that is not supposed to be there. And here it is, width of 100 for the vertical stack. Let's go ahead and clear that, and it now displays properly. And we can now start to see how our title area is stacked on top of our subtitle area. You can see where the marquee appears. So let's go ahead and we can also remove the fixed height for this because the text is actually dictating what the height will be. And let's go ahead and put in our backer color here so we can start to visualize things a little bit more, and we can start playing with some of the spacing. Very cool. Okay, let's go ahead and we're going to do a very similar scenario for the subtitle text. So we're going to go ahead and create a grid which is going to have a pair of variants. So we'll call this main menu button subtitle variants. And one of these is going to be just a simple text block, which will have a couple chevrons. And so we'll call this main menu button subtitle text normal. And then we're going to create a stack panel, which is going to have a call to action and the chevrons. So let's go ahead and drag that into the variants at the bottom, and this will be the main menu button subtitle hover. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and add two text blocks to this, one of which will be the main menu button subtitle text, and this will be the call to action, CTA, and the other one will be the main menu button subtitle text icons. Great. So let's go ahead and we can start styling these now. So the very first thing that we'll do is let's start with our normal one. So it's just going to be a set of 3 chevrons. You can see they kind of appeared under there. we're going to go ahead and change the font and the font size. So we'll go ahead and make that 24. We'll go ahead and make it a bit more of a decorative font. We want that text to be vertically centered, and we will go ahead and do the exact same for this, which is also going to be 3 chevrons, and it's going to be the same font as well. And now we can also center that whilst we go to our call to action text. We don't want to say text block, we want to say navigate. Now we're going to go ahead and change the font of this as well, and we'll also make it 24 point. Now what you'll see has happened here is that these are stacked on top of each other, but we don't want that to happen. What we want is for them to be side by side. The reason why this is happening is because our stack panel is set to a vertical orientation. So really easy to change that. Just select our stack panel, go to the orientation, and change it to horizontal. And then we will have our elements side by side, just like that. So let's go ahead and now work on placing these where they're supposed to be. We're just going to check, we're going to fill our background here so we can get a better visual of what we're dealing with. And perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and we can start massaging some of these layouts a little bit. So the very first thing is that we want to ensure that this is also set to the right settings. That is perfect. Our hover state is horizontal. That is great. Where are we? Here we go. That's what's happening. We don't want a height here. We want it to be like that. Perfect. Okay, that is great. Working really, really well. Let's go ahead and now we can start styling our button a little bit to just make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. In particular, what we're going to want a little bit of a gap between this decorative element and the 2 blocks right here. So we can just come to our margins and let's go ahead and add an 8 pixel gap. We also want a gap between our title and our subtitle, so we can just go ahead and add that to our title area, and we'll go ahead and add an 8 pixel gap up and down. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of margin around the text itself, so we can just use our variant container, which contains both pieces of text, so we don't have to do it individually to each text block. And in this case, let's go ahead and do a margin of 10 on each side. We want to also vertically align this text a little bit more, so it looks like in this case we need to add a little bit of a bottom margin, and that's starting to look a lot better. We'll go ahead and do the exact same for the subtitle variant. So we said that we did 10 on the left and right, and it actually seems to be fairly aligned vertically. It looks like these arrows need a little bit of a nudge though, so we'll go ahead and make those changes here. We probably want to add maybe like 2 to the top. That's looking great, and we'll do the exact same for the unhovered version. Great, so let's go ahead and we can now start coloring in what our different states will be. So we're going to, for example, have our hover text make that title green. So if we go to our hover text, our title, on hover, and we go ahead and make this our green, that is how the hover will look, and it'll go to the white version without the backer when there'll be a blue version on the unhovered. So let's go ahead and actually color that as well. We don't want the foreground to be white of the normal version, we want it to be blue. Very similar situation for the text below. We actually don't want this to be this way. We have our own white in mind that we want on hover. So let's go ahead and paste that in for both elements. And we will also make sure that the unhovered version is a blue. So let's go ahead to the normal version, and that should not be white, but that should be blue. The last thing we're going to want to do is that we're going to want to ensure that there is spacing around this button. Right now you can see that all of the buttons are squished together, so we can go to the root and we can simply add a top and bottom margin to that. Now let's get to the real magical part of this, which is that we created this button template. It's only being used here, but we have all of these other buttons as well. These buttons also have a content block, which is where we're going to set what the button actually reads. So let's go ahead and do that first. This first one is going to be our story mode, and you won't see the changes just yet, and that's normal because we haven't kind of done the magic touch yet. We're going to have our second button be online, and you can see that they've taken change there. We're going to have our third one be an armory where you can customize your mech. We're going to have our next one be the settings menu. And the last one will be a way to quit, which we'll call retire. Now let's go ahead and go into our button once again. And what we're going to do here is that we are going to set this title text to actually correspond to the content that we set at the previous level of the hierarchy. To do that, all that we have to do is to navigate up to the text block field. And instead of saying text block, or we could say a placeholder, and you'll see that it updates, we want this to instead use a binding. We want to bind it to the content block. So let's go ahead and create a binding, and it's going to be a relative binding of the templated parent, and within path we will find content. And look at that, story has appeared. We'll do the same for the other text block. So we'll go to create binding, relative, templated parent, and we will select content. And look at that, it has scaled all automatically. It's looking amazing. So now we get to the really, really special part, which is that we have these unstyled buttons which have content sent to them. We can actually come in and right click on the element itself and go to template, apply resource, button template, our main menu button template. Click on that and look at that, it automatically styles to our button template style. We can go ahead and do this a couple times, and you can actually do it directly on the canvas itself by going to template, button template, and we'll just do these one after another. And before you know it, we have a completely styled main menu. Super, super easy and really, really cool. So now that we have the skeleton for our buttons in place and all of the visual elements there, we can now start looking at our interaction states. Now what I mean by interaction states is how the button will react when you hover over it, when you press it, when it's disabled perhaps, and also it gives us a chance to add some little flourishes and animations that can make navigating the interface a little bit more engaging. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So the way that you will add interaction states into a button template that you've created is if you select it, right click on it and go to template, edit current, very similarly to how we edited the actual visual elements of it. And if you head over to the animation tab in the upper left hand corner, also accessible by Control 5, and you click on it, you'll see that you have two tabs at the very top. One of them which is storyboards and one of them which is visual states. Let's go ahead and click on visual states. And what you'll see here is a collection of different states that can be applied to the button. In particular, you've got your normal, which will be your unhovered state. You've got your mouse over, which will be your hover, a pressed or click state, a disabled state, and also various focused states. Now, the way that I like to work when constructing buttons, and especially working on their interaction states, is that I like to build a maximalist version of the button and then go through and start stripping stuff back to represent the unhovered version, and then I'll go through and bring those elements back when I edit the hovered version. So let's go through that process of first of all stripping back all of the things that are not needed to be shown on the unhovered version. So we're going to go through and we're going to make a bunch of elements 0% opacity. We'll make them not visible at all, and we will then bring those back to full visibility when we start working on the button itself. So we don't want this backer to be visible. We want the title text hover version to not be visible on the unhovered. Let's go ahead and make this subtitle backer 10% opacity. We obviously don't want any of the hover elements shown, and there we have it. We have ended up with what will essentially be our unhovered version of the button. Let's go ahead and now if we click on the mouse over section within the visual states, we can then get this animation timeline that appears, and this is where we will be recording the changes that happen between the unhovered state and the mouse over state or the hover state. Now, to actually register the changes that we want to see made, we need to press on this little icon in the upper left hand corner of the animation timeline that says record. And what this will do is that once it is activated, you'll get this indicator, and now it will actually key any changes that you make in this state. So we're now going to go through and we're going to bring all of our elements back that we hid in the unhovered state. So we'll go ahead and bring all of these back. That'll be basically popping up when you hover over it. The backer we want to become visible. The normal text we want to disappear, and in exchange we'll have the hovered text come back. For the subtitle, we're going to want this backer to go to 100%. we're going to want our hover text to come back, whilst our normal text disappears. And that is all that you need to set up a different visual state. Now, if we were to go ahead and immediately test our changes, we'd encounter a problem pretty fast. Let's see what happens. So if we go to the top of the screen and press the start button, which you can also access by Control P for play, and you start hovering over your buttons, you will see that nothing is happening. How odd, because a couple seconds ago we went through and made some hover states. So why are these not working? Well, to diagnose this problem, we need to actually understand this concept of hit layer visibility. And in particular, we have an interface, which is our interactive elements, which is currently found under a foreground layer. Now, if we go ahead and unlock this foreground layer and scroll down to a property called hit test visibility, you will see that this is ticked on. So what's happening here? Well, essentially, the foreground, which is on top of the interface, is actually blocking mouse inputs from reaching the interactive layer. That's what hit test visibility is. So if we make this hit test invisible, go ahead and save it, and we go ahead and press start or Control P for play, and hover over buttons, you will now see that these are working properly because that foreground is no longer intercepting our mouse actions from the destination that it's supposed to reach. So now that we have some really basic interaction states, and let's look at what we can do if we want to add a little bit of animation flourish to our hover. So to do this, we're going to follow the exact same method where we will go into our button template, edit current. We're going to navigate to the animation tab on the left and go to the visual states. And just as before, we're going to go to the mouse over. And this will bring up the timeline and we'll see our mouse over state. Now what's going to change here is that instead of pressing the record button and keying changes on the first frame of the timeline, we're going to press record and we're going to select the element that we want to animate. In our case, we are going to basically have this navigate text not only fade in on the animation, but also swing from the left inward. So basically what we can do is we will make sure that we are on frame 0, and we know that on frame 0 we're going to want this to be invisible. We're going to want this to become visible a little bit later, so we can just move our playhead to where we want that to appear and pump our opacity back to 100%. And what you'll see now is that it fades in. Let's go ahead and do a very similar process for it sliding in. So we're going to go to the render transform section, and on frame 0 we're going to set this to -32, which you can see shifts it over to the left. And at the same moment that it becomes full opacity, we're going to want to shift this to its origin position, which is 0. And now you'll see that we have a button that slides in and fades in. Let's go ahead and test that in context by pressing Start or Control P at the very top of the screen. And now you'll see that we have some navigate text that slides in when you hover over. Really, really cool. So for the very last part of this walkthrough, we're going to get our hands dirty with using data in Noesis Studio. So to demonstrate this, we're going to create a banner that appears in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, which will have information parsed into it, not from the layout itself, but actually from data. So let's go ahead and set that up to begin. The very first thing that we're going to want to do is to head over to the data tab in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, which you can access via Control 7. We're going to then set up a dynamic type for our banner. Within this banner, there are going to be 3 elements. The first is going to be the banner title, which will make a string, and we'll set it to be always between 2 and 5 words. The reason why we are setting this as one of the unique and really cool features that we offer in Noesis Studio is the ability to fill data tables with placeholder information. So this serves as a guideline for how it will populate that. We're also going to want to have a banner description here. This will also be a string, but this time, since it's going to be body copy, we probably want to be between 5 and 10 words. Lastly, we're going to want a banner image, which will accompany the title and the description, and this will be of object type, and it will be a bitmap image. So we'll just scroll down and find that bitmap image, and that is our banner set created. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a view model, which will be applied to this entire page and which will contain this banner. So let's go ahead and create a new one, and we'll call this view model. Type class, And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a property to that, and it'll be the object of banner that we created earlier. So we'll call this banner view model. Great. Now the step that we have left is we actually need to apply this view model that we created to the entire page. So the easiest way to do that is to go to the navigator, click on page, and then this will light up in the very top of the data panel, and we can go to view model and press this icon to assign it. And now our page has the view model on it. Let's go ahead and now dig into actually creating the component that will use some of this information. So we're just going to go ahead and also pick to have the banner for our banner view model. Go ahead and save, and let's get working on the panel itself. So we're going to first of all put a grid in, which we will call our banner. And we will go ahead and align this to where we want it to be. So we're going to want to go for this upper right-hand corner. So we're going to have, first of all, we'll set our rows and columns to be something that we can control a little bit better. And we will go ahead and assign this to column 3, which will have it arrive there. And we want to go one row down and perhaps 2 rows spanned downwards maximum. So let's go ahead and then add a border. And this is going to be our banner backer. Now, a border differs in a couple ways from the grid. It does have some restrictions in terms of the amount of children that you can have within it, but where it really shines is in terms of the outline and radius controls. So let's go ahead and just start styling this a little bit. We're going to use a really nice blue for the background here so we can kind of visualize what we're doing a little bit better. But let's go ahead and remove the border because we don't want that. But we're going to go ahead and add a corner radius. We'll go ahead and make that 32 all around. Now within our banner, we're going to have 2 sections. One of them is going to be the image section, and one of those is going to be the content section. So let's go ahead and create a vertical stack, which will reflect that. So we'll call it banner vertical stack. So within this, we're going to have a grid at the top, which is going to be our banner image. And we are also going to have another stack panel within this, which is going to be our banner text. Let's go ahead and start with the text. What we're first going to do is we're going to set a fixed height on our image. We're going to make it 256, and we'll play with that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and add some text in. So we'll bring in a text block. This first one will be for banner text title, and our second one will be banner text description. Now before we go any further, let's go ahead and get up close and personal with these, and we're going to go ahead and just apply a little bit of styling to these, just to make it a little bit more visible and to prepare us for when we're going to be parsing data into this. So let's go ahead and make that 32. Let's go ahead and make it a really nice green color. And we're going to go ahead and also have this center aligned. Our description, we're going to go ahead and grab a nice off white, and we'll go ahead and make this 24 point, change the font, and we're going to also center align that one. Wonderful. Let's go ahead and just make sure that we have no heights that we don't want. So we do not want a height on this banner text. We want to conform to the height of the content within it. Next, we can start working on the image itself. So we're going to grab a couple border elements, and our very first border is going to be our backer. So banner image backer, and we're just going to make this a nice flat green. So we'll go ahead and edit the background value for that, make that green. We'll go ahead and get rid of the border, which we don't want, nor the border thickness. But now what we want is that we want to also add a corner radius to match. So we're going to make that 24 all around. But what we also want to do is we want to have a bit of an outer margin on this. So let's just do 16 all around, and now we're starting to get something that feels a little bit nicer. Let's go ahead and add another border, and this will be banner image backer pattern. And very similarly to how at the start of this we applied background images to our grids, we can also do the same here, and we are going to select our chaos pattern, make it uniform to fill, and perhaps change the opacity of that to 25%. We'll then go through and just fix up some of our metrics here, and get rid of the border as well. The next element that we want to add is we want to add our actual image. It will be changed depending on the data that's selected. So we'll call this banner image asset. And what we will do is we will go ahead and just make sure that all of our measurements are nice and consistent across everything. We're not going to want any border on this, but what we are going to want to do is we're going to want to select a background. Let's go ahead and just polish some of the presentation of this banner. To begin with, we don't want to span the entire height of the page, so let's go ahead and align that to the top. Let's go ahead and take a moment just to polish the spacing a little bit. Maybe we'll do 16 pixels margin left, right, and bottom. That's starting to look a little bit nicer. Let's now get into the fun stuff, which is going to be how we assign our data to these two text blocks as well as to the image asset. So let's go ahead and open our data, and you can see that we have our banner view, and these are currently empty. Let's go ahead and assign these. So if you remember how we assigned a content field to our buttons earlier, we're also going to do a very similar thing to the text block. So right now it is just using the text block default text. What we want to do is we want to create a binding. We want to bind it to our view model. So go ahead and create binding. And within this context section, if you go to the path, you will find your banner view model right here. Now, if we select this and we select the corresponding one, which is banner title, it'll go blank. Totally normal because there is nothing inside of that data. We'll do the same thing for the description. So create binding, go to path, banner view model, description. And what I want to demonstrate to you now before we continue and before we touch the image is some of the automatic population features that I spoke about earlier. So right now it's all blank. However, there's this icon here on the view model that says generate random values. And if you remember before, we had basically specified that the title will be between 2 and 5 words, the description between 5 and 10. So when we do generate random values, it will fill these fields in whilst respecting those constraints. Let's go ahead and do that. Cool, look at that, everything worked great. Let's go ahead and return to our image before we kind of come through and assign the correct content there. So if we select our image asset, if you remember how we always applied images to background layers, well, this is the exact same process. You select the background for your border element, go to image brush, but this time instead of selecting from the image source list, instead what you're going to do is very similar to what we did with the text. Click on the 3-dot menu, create binding, and within this list you will find banner image. Go ahead and select that. We can close this, and now we can actually do all of our work within the data properties panel. So banner title, we don't want it to be this, we want it to be what it's actually going to be. So healer module. Press enter and that updates. Same for the description. We're going to call this download the healer module and gain the ability to restore ally health. Press enter, that'll update as well. Likewise for the image, I can have different sets that each have a different image here. In our case, it's going to be the health image, and you can see that this is being stretched. Really easy to fix. Click on the image, go to the image brush, and you'll see that it's set to fill when instead we want it uniform to fill, and there it is at the right proportion. Now this is going to be awesome because now you can have different sets of data, and if there's one for currency, for example, you can have that image come in. If there's one for armor, you can have that one come in. But in our case, we want to be health. And so that is at a really basic level how you can use data directly inside of Noesis Studio. And so there we have it. We've created a very basic main menu from start to finish within Noesis Studio using a variety of techniques. Let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like all together. So of course we have our general layout. We've learned how to work with text at a basic level. We've learned how to create button interaction states as well as a first look at the animation timeline. And of course, we've learned how to work with data and how to populate this banner with content that comes from the data model rather than from the layout in itself. That about covers it. Hopefully this was useful to you. Hopefully it made you excited to use this tool. We'll do some more tutorials in the future with more in-depth looks at kind of particular elements and some more advanced techniques, but hopefully this is a really good start to see what you can achieve. Thank you so much for joining. See you next time.